Insufficient! Of course. The ingredient was life, and it has so willingly come.
He's fat, he's unhealthy, he'll dropkick you from the belfry, he's Festus. And he's coming to town August 23rd alongside the Champions of Chaos DLC as the representative for Nurgle the Plague God. Pestilent presents await all the good boys and girls of the old world and beyond. This model is everything tabletop fans would have hoped for, down to the flabby neck fupa and adorable little chaos familiar perched on his shoulder. I shall call him Dave. Dude looks gross from head to toe. The nastier you look in Grandpappy's employ, the more robust you tend to be, and robust is a good word to describe this freak of nature. So, let's introduce old Sawbones to the ever-growing cast of Warhammer 3 Legendary Lords properly, and talk about how he played in the source material, which should give us a pretty good idea of how he'll translate to Total War. Dr. Festus, the Dark Apothecary, was once an Imperial physician of great renown, who created hospitals all across Nordland to combat plague spreading across the Sea of Claws. He was known for his brilliance and compassion, but in the Warhammer world, the greatest of us have the furthest to fall, and his obsession for helping patients was the very element that made him a target for corruption. Chaos takes what's noblest about you and twists it into a dark caricature of your quality. And so it was, the dead and dying in his triage tent all turned their heads in unison like zombies and promised Festus the knowledge he needed to counter every malady imaginable. Information that, unfortunately for the good doctor, drove him irrevocably insane. His compassion was wiped away, his love for helping others along with it, but the brilliant mind and need to experiment remained, and he has plagued the Empire ever since, literally, concocting and channeling the foulest diseases from Nurgle's Grand Garden. He could really start anywhere in Immortal Empires, but given his ties to Nordland and the Empire, and the fact that one of these four lords is quite likely to begin their story in the Brass Keep of the Middle Mountains, it's probably the most logical place for him to begin his playthrough, which will put some additional pressure on Toddy and Karl Franz straight from turn 1, and of course allow Festus to return home to Nordland quite quickly. In 8th edition Tabletop, he was actually a sad little panda in the Warriors of Chaos army book, because unlike Sigvald, Valkia, Village, Galrauch the Great Drake, and others, he was not a Lord character, but instead a hero. So just like Throg and Wulfric, he's finally being treated like the Lord he is, although realistically, he is more of a slow corrupter and insidious schemer, cabal organizing loner, that sort of thing, rather than a leader of large armies invading you and smashing down your walls. He had some really cool special rules in 8th edition though, that should make for a fun playstyle in Total War. Shouldn't come as a shock to anybody, but he is indeed a caster of the lore of Nurgle, a lore of magic that is, in my opinion anyway, very strong in both campaign and multiplayer. Fantastic healing spells and great sustained damage and wave clear with Stream of Corruption, which when overcast is absolutely brutal, especially against chaff, but can even pierce armor of Chosen and that sort of thing, and Blight Boil for clearing out waves of infantry. He also had poison attacks and regeneration, which combined with his small foot profile should make him very tanky and survivable when mixed in with a horde of Nurgle Chosen or Plague Bears. But there were 3 features on the tabletop that made him unique. Harbinger of Pestilence conferred poison attacks to any unit Festus joined, Healing Elixirs conferred regeneration to any unit Festus joined, and Pestilent Potions allowed him to force his evil concoctions down the throats of nearby enemies, dealing massive damage. So, in essence, he was a support hero meant to join important units and make them difficult or impossible to kill, and at the start of any close combat phase, he could either burst heal himself and allies, or attempt to hurt enemies with a DOT. As with many other legendary lords in the series, CA is using that as the blueprint for his makeup in Game 3, where healing elixirs will heal allies in an area of effect, and pestilent potions will deal damage to enemy combatants. But both will act like toggle passive abilities that are mutually exclusive, meaning only one of those can be active at any given time. So Festus is essentially a Mortis engine on foot, which, combined with all the new heavily armored troops coming for Nurgle, has a very high likelihood of making him extremely good, possibly the best of the 4 new legendary lords. Think about Chosen with regeneration. That is going to be a problem for a lot of factions to deal with. Mortis characters like the Fey Enchantress have long been powerful picks, and Festus may be even harder to snipe than those, because he's not mounted, and I don't think he'll be considered large either. So while he'll certainly have some mobility issues and will move probably at the speed of regular human characters, he can't get shot, or at least will be very difficult to shoot, and he's going to be in the middle of a huge blob of very tanky infantry, some of which already have regen, so he'll be getting double or triple sources. So combined with his great lore of magic, I think there's a good chance he's going to be a problem. Now, let's talk faction and lord effects and how his traits will carry over to campaign. All of his vassals will gain poison attacks and spread Nurgle corruption, which seems to be the main way CA is translating his Harbinger Pestilence special rule, which is unfortunately not very useful for Nurgle here, because basically their entire army already deals poison damage, and I suspect that will carry over to the mortal side as well, but poison attacks could potentially be useful in the undivided portion of their roster for units like Shaggus or Trolls. Remember that the Champions of Chaos DLC are technically under Warriors of Chaos, and still have access to undivided units, so conferring poison damage there could make an impact even for the undivided foot troops like Chosen, who are not marked by Nurgle. Festus can also brew plagues, which will last 3 turns longer than normal, and he'll gain 25 souls every time one of those is spread, which is how you summon those higher tier demonic units and ascend your characters into demon princes. Sacrifice souls, acquire currency, win the campaign easy peasy. Now the real big kahuna here is the fact that his battle healing cap is an extra 25% above normal, which means you can effectively double the HP pool of your entire army with good use of Fleshy Abundance and healing elixirs. Given the healing rate for abilities like Chaos Tombblade, there's a good chance healing elixir will be 0.2% regen per second, which means in 5 seconds, 4 units around Festus will each gain 1% of their total HP back, passively. I don't believe you'll have access to Fecundity from Nurgle's army abilities, or Locus of Fecundity from Plaguebringers, so you may not be able to stack multiple sources of healing in quite the same way as the vampire counts can right now, but your center around Festus is still going to feel pretty much unkillable, especially in campaign, and especially if they're armored. Chosen with health regen and Fleshy Abundance are going to be absolutely bananas in pajamas. So, let's talk aesthetics and impressions. In this screenshot of Festus, you can see the Chaos War Shrine with the Mark of Nurgle, Chaos Knights of Nurgle, and a Chaos Sorcerer, and quite a few of the new assets are looking awesome, like really, really good. Festus himself is about as faithful a recreation as a model can possibly get, and his voice acting in the trailer was perfect too. He's a goofy motherlicka. I don't know if that was a Scottish accent in the trailer. My ear for European dialects is not particularly elevated, so my profuse apologies if I just offended any of the 17 people that live in Scotland. But yeah, the Chaos War Shrine looks freakishly gorgeous here, and we know that Chaos Sorcerers can now use them as mounts to project their influence across the battlefield. So the Mark of Nurgle variant will likely have its own unique effects, perhaps tied to healing or large AoE debuffs. Could be a Mortis engine too, that sort of thing. The Marauders in background are green and very gross looking, although I don't imagine anything super special is actually being done with their models, kind of just like a recolor for them. Not entirely surprising, if perhaps a teeny bit disappointing. And the Chaos Knights are looking quite imposing in the background there, almost certainly the slowest of the 4 variants, but poison-wielding tank lords should be a fun addition to the roster, and we don't really get a great look at them, but it does seem like their helmets and perhaps other parts of their model are unique, similar to what we'd expect from the Tzeentch rework we've already seen on the Doom Knights and Chaos Knights. Now, I will say I'm not the biggest fan of the reused staff on the left. If I'm not mistaken, that already existed for regular Tzeentch and Undivided Sorcerers in the base game, and I'm not entirely convinced a fiery-looking Undivided staff is the right choice aesthetically for a Nurgle mage. I think a rotting piece of twisted oak with maybe severed hands or death's heads and tomes draped from the top would be a lot more fitting. And we're not getting many truly new units here either, so I'd argue the reskins, particularly for the hero characters, Chosen and Knights, the elites of the bunch, should go the extra mile in terms of the baubles and flair to help differentiate them from their Game 1 counterparts. Kind of what the whole point of this DLC is to an extent. I do think we shouldn't be reusing too many assets in terms of undivided troop choices when we have other things we could work in to make those models more unique. But I will say the model itself is great. The antlers and bells are a really nice touch and thematically appropriate for Nurgle. The teeth and bulky armor as well. The Nurgle iconography, we got 2 or 3 looks at the triple circle symbol, and it's a really good looking model. It makes it very clear which god he represents. One element that may disappoint some people, but perhaps shouldn't come as a shock, is that the Chaos Warriors and Chosen, like the Hero Sorcerer in this picture, will probably not be rocking the bloated intestines open to the world tentacle aesthetic that you see sometimes in artwork. I do think that will come for Nurgle eventually, perhaps with Tamarkan or the Glotkin when Putrid Blight Kings and more specialized elite Nurgle units arrive, but that time is not yet. And either way, given the quality of the Tzeentch Knights, the Doom Knights, and Slaanesh Chosen we've seen thus far, I do expect the Nurgle elite are still going to look awesome, and we do get a glimpse of that with the Chaos Knights in the background. They look pretty cool. I do think they're going to be pretty awesome to play with. They'll just be going for the more rusted, heavy metal approach rather than the bloaty boy syndrome we see in some concept art. So one thing I'd like to see moving forward is a bit more love for the lower tier units. It would be sick if there were some more rotten and raggedy looking foot troops like the acolytes of the cultist heroes that are already in game, all bedraggled, encrusted, and haggard as a flagellant type mob unit that you just kind of throw in to the meat grinder and let them do their thing. But for now, the focus is pretty clearly on the 4 lords for this DLC and some nice, but perhaps not utterly mind-blowing model updates for a huge section of each god's mortal roster. It's not perfect, but I think the DLC is shaping up pretty nicely. There are some great models on display, and it'll add a lot of flavor and variety to some of the coolest Chaos rosters in the setting. So tune in tomorrow as we take a closer look at Festus and his campaign, and I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.